You may not recognize Nephilim, but all of you have probably heard about giants in the Bible, such as David and Goliath is the most popular one. Well, today I'm going to talk to you about giants. And what I want you to do is keep in mind that if you believe in the Bible and you believe in God, then you accept the supernatural. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts when it comes to the supernatural. You accept all of it for what it is. Demons, angels, God, beings that exist beyond time, space, and matter, beyond this reality. And there's no denying that if you believe in the Bible. The Bible is very clear when it talks about demons, magic, angels, that all this is very, very literal. So before I get started today, I want you to keep a couple thoughts in mind as I'm going through this information. The Bible never says that the other gods of the ancient world were not real. The Bible calls them false gods, pretenders. They are the counterfeits to the real, true God. And today I'm going to explain to you the ancient origins of them. I would like to go ahead and state a quote here, right before I get started, by Sir Isaac Newton. About the time of the end, a body of men will be raised up who will turn their attention to the prophecies and insist upon their literal interpretation in the midst of much clamor and opposition. Today I'm not going to only be insisting on a literal interpretation of the Bible, but also ancient history and ancient legends. So without further ado, everyone, I give you Nephilim, the gods and giants of the ancient world. So to get your minds prepared for this information, I'm going to start out with the evidence. Where is the evidence of giants? Right here. This is a picture of a human femur bone excavated out of Turkey. Right here is an artist's rendering of what that femur bone would have looked like to scale on a being. Right here is Dr. Kent Hovind holding a replica of that femur bone, and another artist rendering of what that would have looked like fit to scale. Right here, we have the New York Times in 1908, 200 skeletons over 8 feet in height with heads 18 inches from front to back. I got a big melon, folks, but my head is only 11 inches front to back. So you're looking at something that is about a little more than a time and a half the size of my own skull. Now you might say, Mason, 8 feet, that isn't too crazy. We've seen humans get to that height. Here's what I want you to keep in mind. When I'm talking about these beings were warriors. They were worshipped as gods in ancient times. The humans that you see today that get up to 8 feet, 9 feet, the tallest human I've ever seen recorded was the Russian Makarov, and he was 9'3". The problem is with these human beings that they die around their mid-20s, early 30s. They're sickly. They don't get out of their bed much. They have a problem with their pituitary gland producing too much growth hormone. What happens is that their heart stays the same size, but their bodies get to this massive size. Their hearts work overtime to pump blood to that giant, massive frame. Right here, St. Paul globe, nearly 11 foot in height, with 4.5-inch metacarpals and a 17 to 18-inch ulna. Right here, New York Times, yet again in 1902, we have a 12-foot skeleton that was found with teeth that had the size of hickories or walnuts, and a 7-foot circumference of the chest. My chest, I'm a pretty big guy. I'm about 240 pounds, 5'10". My chest circumference is probably less than 4 feet. So you're looking at something that has a much larger frame than I. These aren't just tall, lanky people. These are massive beings that have a ratio to fit that frame. Right here, New Age Magazine, Volume 18, 10-foot tall skeleton excavated out of a burial ground. New York Times, yet again, in 1880, 2 skeletons, 11'8" in height. Right here, this is a drawing of a 11'6" man from an Italian coal mine. Right here, we have a skull that was found about 3 times the size of an ordinary human's. Now, one thing you're going to notice is that in these findings, most of these skeletons I just showed you came from Native American burial grounds, like such as here in Ohio, we have Serpent Mound. If you actually talk to some of the natives in the local area, none of them take credit for actually building those mounds. They say in their oral traditions that those mounds were actually built by what they call the giants, the tribe of the giants. And these mounds are all over the United States. They're everywhere. And this is where we found a lot of these skeletons are in these ancient burial mounds. And we also find things like this. This is a 39-pound axe head, okay? I'm a big boy. I swung a 10-pound sledgehammer before for, 10, 15 minutes, and I'm whooped. Who is swinging a 39-pound axe head? That is going to require someone of massive size and stature to be able to use it as a weapon, okay? Especially to be accurate with it. Here's a 27-pound axe head, just to give you, which is significantly smaller than what I just showed you. Still something massive. Someone's going to take a lot bigger in size and strength than me. Now, these giants that I just showed you, biggest one we saw was roughly about 12 feet tall. I would say that those giants were post-flood, right? Now, I'm going to be getting into some some depositions from conquistadors written down in their chronicles about giants that were much, much larger. So to give you an idea, this is from Bernal Diaz de Castillo, page 185. They dragged forth a bone, or rather a thigh bone of one of those giants, which was very strong and measured up to the length of a man of good stature. This bone was still entire from the knee to the hip joint. I measured it by my own person and found it to be that of my own length. Although I am a man of considerable height, they showed us many similar pieces of bones that they were all worm-eaten and decayed. We, however, did not doubt for an instant that this country had once been inhabited by giants. Cortez observed that we ought to forward these bones to His Majesty in Spain by the very first opportunity. Next, I'm going to go ahead and cover a deposition from Pedro Cieza de Leon, conquistador and chronicler, from the Chronicle of Peru in 1553. This is what he had to say. The natives relate what they have heard from their fathers, that from over the sea in large boats made of reeds came men so large that a man of common body proportions measured only up to their knees. Their eyes were as big as small plates. And I have heard of Spaniards that have seen fragments of teeth that if they swore, if they were whole, would weigh more than a butcher's half pound. That's the size of my fist, guys. Teeth. Human teeth, the size of my fist. This is what they say about the giants, which we believed happened, because in this region they have found and find still massive bones. Now let's look at Burnaby Cobo, Jesuit missionary and historian, History of the New World, 1653. The first Spanish conquistadors of this kingdom found in the peninsula of the port Santa Elena, diocese of Quito, human bones of massive size that they knew belonged to giants, and among them shin bones more than 3 feet long. And its skull was so abnormally gigantic that some of the Spaniards thrusting their swords through its eye socket could barely reach the backside of its skull. To give you an idea of how massive that is, Spanish conquistadors carried a rapier sword. Rapier swords measured 46 inches from tip to hilt. What they are describing is a skull with the depth of almost 4 feet. So someone like me, I could almost crawl into this thing's cranium and take a nap. Massive, massive things. If you actually put that to scale, you're looking at something that's 25 feet, maybe even 30 feet. Each tooth was no smaller than a fist. Again, teeth that size. Now, folks, we're going to get into the word Nephilim. Where does this come from? It actually branches from the Hebrew word Nephal. Actually, to get more in depth on that, the word Nephilim in the English language translates to giants. Same thing in the Greek. Now, the word Nephilim is a Hebrew word, and like I just said, it branches from the Hebrew word Nephal, which means fallen or to fall. The first time you'll ever see this word is in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. Now, this word doesn't necessarily mean giant, it's just translated into the Greek and English language that way. What this word actually means is the offspring of the fallen angels. And just like how we humans have a variety of offspring, tall, short, black, white, the fallen angels and their kin are also going to come in many varieties. Not all of them are necessarily as giant as the ones that we had just seen. And we're going to get to that here when we talk about some of the legends. So biblical origins, first things first. This is where we see the origins of the Nephilim, or the giants. And it came to pass when man began to multiply on the face of the earth, that the daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and took them wives of which they had chose. Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 2. Now, that phrase, sons of God, in the Hebrew is B'nei Elohim. Now, if you're going to go to the Strong's Concordance, what you're going to find is Ben and Elohim. Now, the phrase sons of God is going to appear 6 times in the Old Testament and about 5 times in the New Testament. In every instance of the Old Testament, the phrase sons of God is actually used to reference angels. In the New Testament, it's actually referenced to Christians, the body of Christ. I'm going to show you here some of the Old Testament uses. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. So in the book of Job, we're seeing that this phrase, sons of God, is clearly depicting angels, right? The original theory that you'll hear in much of the mainstream church nowadays is that the sons of God is referring to the line of Seth. But if you actually look at the Old Testament phrase and use of it, that does not match up whatsoever. So we're going to take a look at the Septuagint. If you don't know what the Septuagint is, all it is a Greek translation of the Old Testament of the Bible. Now in the Septuagint, this is what that very same verse says. And it came to pass on a day that, behold, the angels of God came to stand before the Lord, and the devil came with them. So again, they're translating it directly to angels. Job chapter 38, verse 7. When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Again, directly referencing angels. And we know that for a fact because when the stars were created, that was day 4 of the creation. Man had not been created until day 6. So again, we know for a fact that this phrase, sons of God, is referencing angels. In the Septuagint, when the stars were made, all my angels praised me with a loud voice. Daniel chapter 3, verse 25. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of fire. They have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Again, this actually comes from the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, where they were thrown into the furnace for not bowing down to Nebuchadnezzar, right? And an angel of God came and saved them from the fires of the furnace. So again, referencing angels. So I'm pretty sure I've beaten it over the head now. Sons of God means angels in the Old Testament. So now we're going to get to where we actually see the word giants, aka Nephilim, for the first time. And that is in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. There were giants in the earth in those days, aka Nephilim, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. What the Bible is telling you right here is that these beings that were walking the earth are going to become famous. They're going to be told all throughout history. You're going to be men of well-known, mighty men. What I'm saying is that these beings, these Nephilim, they were worshipped as the gods of old, branching all the way from the Hindu and Sumerian beliefs. So now we're going to go ahead and look at the verses following after these giants appear. I want you to pay attention to something. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And repented the Lord that he had made man on earth, and it grieved him in his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping things, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. It's no coincidence that the verse where giants first appear, the Nephilim first appear, and then all of a sudden, the very next set of verses, God is saying, I'm going to destroy creation. I'm going to wipe the slate clean. 2 reasons that I see here that God is going to destroy the earth. First of all, men's hearts were doing evil continuously, and it grieved God for what he had saw men was doing. And second of all, you had these beings walking the earth, these fearsome beings. So what I'm saying is that God sent the flood to not only restart the slate, but also to save mankind. Because as I'm going to be getting into these legends later, you're going to realize that if these things had been allowed to walk around without being checked, humanity would not have survived long. And you're going to see that for yourself here very soon. So this is the very next set of verses, Genesis chapter 6, verses 8 through 9. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. And Noah walked with God. So when I see this verse, I'm seeing that God is giving us 2 reasons why he selected Noah and his family. First of all, Noah was a godly man and walked with him. And God saw that his ways were godly ways. But the second thing, the reason why he selected Noah, that word perfect in his generations, that word perfect is the Hebrew word tamim, which means perfect, without blemish, undefiled, complete, full, upright, and without blame. So not only did God select Noah because he was a godly man, but he selected him because he was genetically not corrupted. So what was the result of these angels coming down and laying with the daughters of men, creating these Nephilim? Well, we get that answer in Genesis chapter 6, verse 17. And I behold, even I do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, whereas in the breath of life and from under the heaven everything that is in the earth shall die. So what happened to the angels? We know that the creation was punished, right? God was wiping the slate clean with us. What happened to these angels that laid down with these women? We actually see that in Jude chapter 1, verse 6. And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains unto darkness until the judgment of the great day. That is also repeated yet again in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. So we're seeing that not only was the creation and these Nephilim were judged and destroyed, but the angels that created them were also severely punished. So now we're going to get into the Norse origins, folks. So what I'm telling you is that these Nephilim, these are the ancient gods that you hear of for so much throughout Norse, Greek, Native American mythology and origins, oral traditions, as well as the Hindu and Sumerian beliefs. So in the Norse origins, the beginning of the gods started with this being named Ymir, right? Ymir came from a relationship between the primordial beings of Muspelheim, or the flames of Muspelheim, which go to become the stars in Norse mythology, and also the ice of Niflheim. Now, the ice of Niflheim is essentially an earthly substance, or an earthly essence, I should say. We're seeing a relationship between a heavenly body, which is the flames of Muspelheim, which I believe is a representation of the fallen angels, and Niflheim, which I think is a representation of the daughters of man. Flames of Muspelheim melted away the ice, creating this god, Ymir. From Ymir, this is where Freya, Odin, all the Norse gods that we know so very well come from this being. Now, throughout Norse mythology, you are going to find cannibalism and human sacrifices. One of the beings that came out from Ymir were the Jotun. Now, the Jotun are just depicted as giants, right? It actually comes from an old Germanic word which means devourers. You will also hear famous stories such as King On and his sacrifices of 9 sons to Odin, in which Odin granted him 20 years of life for every son that he sacrificed. Of course, these beings were worshipped as gods. They had great knowledge of the smith and forge. You hear the legends of dwarves and them building Thor's hammer. They were capable of building great structures and cities, such as the elves of Norse mythology, and even Asgard, the city of the gods, of the Aesir gods. What you will also find is that there was a great war and a great judgment amongst these gods as well. Everything that you're seeing right here, you're going to see all these similarities I have listed are repeated in every single pantheon since the beginning of time. So in this great war, you had the Aesir and the Vanir. They fought against each other. And the original god, Ymir, was actually slain by Odin himself. Now when Ymir was killed, a flood of his own blood came down on the earth and wiped out the rest of the giants. Keep that in mind. We're seeing that the flood is being repeated in this narrative. Let's go and get to the Greek origins. So, in the Greek origins, the gods really started out with the Titans and the Hecatoncheires and the Cyclopses, right? Well, those beings actually came from a relationship between the god Uranus, which is the stars in Norse mythology. Greek mythology, which again, the stars representation of the angels. And it was a relationship between the stars and Gaia, which is Earth. She is Mother Earth, which I believe are the daughters of man. Now, again, in Greek origins, you're going to see cannibalism and human sacrifices attributed to these gods, such as Kronos. Kronos is famously known for devouring his own children in fear that they would one day rise up against him and dethrone him, in which we all know did happen in the Greek pantheon. Of course, these things were worshipped as gods. They had great knowledge of the smith and forge, such as Hephaestus crafting the weapons of the gods, and the Cyclopeans also crafting Zeus's thunderbolt, which I believe personally is not a metaphysical thunderbolt, more of a symbol of a great energy source. They were capable of building great structures and cities. Zeus is attributed as being the father of the Greeks or the Macedonians, and Apollo and Poseidon are attributed to building the great walls of Troy. Now, there was again a great war and a great judgment that came against these gods, such as the Titanomachy and the Gigantomachy. Now, we all hear about the War of the Gods and the War of the Titans, where titans such as Kronos and his gang fought against his sons and his fellow Olympians, in which the Olympians came out victorious. Now, what we also see is that there is a flood during the Deucalion era, they actually came down and wiped out the rest of the giants as well. So we're noticing again, not only is there a great war and a great judgment, but it's coming in the form of a flood yet again, matching with the biblical narrative. Now we're going to take a look at this video of Native American origins.
In the oral tradition of many tribes, I have yet to come across a tribal member from a tribe that does not have stories of giants roaming the land. And the way, as my father told me, and as it was told to him by his father, my grandfather, and passed down, the star people came from the seven sisters. The seven sisters being what we call the constellation of the Pleiades. The seven sisters and also the warrior's belt, which we know today as Orion. So from the belt of Orion, from that belt and from the seven sisters is where these star people came from. And the star people would come, they made themselves out to be gods because they had power, they had big medicine, like our people say. They were able to do great feats that the people were just astonished by. And so they took them to be gods because that's what they presented themselves to be. In that manner is how they then went and took the women from the different tribes. And from there is where the giant tribes were birthed from. The women did not survive the births of these giant beings. But as these giants continue to procreate and continue to spread across the land, there's many stories of the people and the tribes fighting against them. Sometimes, with good results, sometimes with bad results. Until eventually there was a culmination of the flood that came and destroyed the giants off the land. We still have some stories of giants after the flood. Ixtipapa, which was a giant that lived in Georgia among the Muskogee Creek. Ixtipapa means man-eaters, because these giant beings would just come and take a regular-sized human being and just pick them up and just bite their head off and just drink the blood, like popping the cap on a bottle, boom, 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 boom. So they received the name Ixtipapa, man-eater. The origin of them is not something that I know of that our oral tradition goes into. Like who created them? How did they begin? We don't have that. All we know is where they came from, and what constellations they came from to our people. And the giant races, they varied in height. They were the ones who built a lot of these ancient mound structures. We simply didn't have the technology to do it. Did regular-sized human beings have the time to do it? Yes. And there are copies of mounds that have been made. Just like there's the three pyramids in Egypt, two of those pyramids are copies of the oldest one. But they could not quite match the engineering, the architecture, the ley lines, they couldn't do it. So yes, there are mounds that native people have built, but they're a far cry from these gigantic mound structures that the giants built. It is good to mention that the stars, the constellations, the astronomy of the ley lines of the constellations, that's something that was taught to us by the star people. It was knowledge that was given to our ancient ancestors. And the belief was that there were certain times during certain seasons where there were portals that would open up into the spirit world. And markedly the equinoxes were the main times when this would take place. Enoch, Georgia, in Macon, Georgia, modern-day Macon, Georgia, there's the remains of an earth lodge that is perfectly aligned for the summer equinoxes and the spring equinoxes. And so it was believed that when the people would gather there during those times, that those portals would open, those doorways would open, and it would open the lines of communication and also for these spirit beings to come through, and whether it was teach, trade, or even take people with them, they would do that.
Okay, so now guys, we're going to go ahead and recap the similarities of everything I just showed you. All these godlike beings are attributed in all these pantheons and oral traditions came from star people, or an essence of the stars, and the tribes of women, or a earthly essence. Cannibalistic, worshipped as gods, great knowledge of the smith and forge, built great structures and cities, and yet again, in the Native American belief, there was a great war against these giants in which the people rebelled against them and tried to slay them from the earth, but in the Native American belief, it was the flood that wiped them out. So again, we're seeing the biblical narrative being repeated yet again in another origin. So was there really a flood? So this is what the Bible has to say in the New Testament from the words from the mouth of Jesus himself, knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were in the beginning of the creation. For this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. But the heavens of the earth, which are now by the same, which are kept in store, reserved unto fire, unto the day of judgment and perdition of godly men. So Jesus is warning us that in the last days are going to become scoffers, are going to be ignorant of the original creation and ignorant of the flood. So did the flood actually happen? Let's look at some of the evidence here. So now, a lot of you heard it in the flood story that it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Well, this is actually the passage that talks about where the waters really came from. And it came to pass after 7 days, and the waters of the flood were upon the earth, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day where all the fountains of the great deep were broken up. And the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. That phrase, fountains of the deep, really important. I'm going to get to that. So, it couldn't possibly have rained enough to actually flood the entire earth, because you're going to run into a scientific problem here. It's called the latent heat of condensation. Every time it rains, it generates heat. Well, if it rained enough to completely submerge the entire earth, it would generate so much heat that it would destroy all life on earth. It would be impossible for life to survive. But that's not where the floodwaters came from. It came from the fountains of the great deep. So let's look at some scientific discoveries that we've had here just recently. This is from NOVA in 2014. Huge underground reservoir holds 3 times as much water as Earth's oceans. That was in 2014. CNN, Atlantic freshwater aquifer has enough water to fill 1 billion Olympic pools. This is just what they're discovering, folks. So what we see in our oceans is just the surface of how much water is actually inside the earth. The significance behind that is that the Bible is talking about the fountains of the great deep. We didn't even discover that there were fountains in the oceans until the 70s, right? Initially, they suspected of these subterranean chambers of water in the 20s, I believe. But the Mid-Atlantic Ridge Project by Famous in 1973 is where we discovered the spectacular hot springs on the Galapagos Rift in the Pacific Ocean by the 23-foot-long submarine, submersible Alvin in 1977. Alvin also explored and photographed and sampled hot springs on the Pacific East Rise just south of the Gulf of California in 1979, and the research still continues to this day. So again, Bible that this was written by Moses 3,000 years ago is talking about fountains of the great deep, which we didn't even discover until the 70s. Now this is a video by a physicist by the name of Dr. Walt Brown.
Having served as director of one of the United States Defense Department's major research and development laboratories, Dr. Walter Brown comes with an impressive list of credentials and credibility. In tackling the subject of Earth's geological development, Dr. Brown has developed a theory that contradicts the generally accepted viewpoint of the scientific community. Profound and far-reaching, this respected scientist's hydroplate theory not only offers a completely new approach to the geological sciences, it succeeds where the prevailing theory often fails. It simply and logically explains some of the Earth's most profound mysteries.
We can see on our planet 25 major features that can now be systematically explained as a consequence of a global flood that erupted from subterranean chambers with an energy release exceeding the explosion of 30 trillion hydrogen bombs. This theory shows us just how rapidly major mountains form. It explains the coal, oil, and methane deposits, the rapid continental drift, and why on the ocean floor there are huge trenches, hundreds of canyons, and tens of thousands of volcanoes. This theory also explains the ice ages, and it gives the primary reason for global warming. It explains the formation of the layered strata in almost all fossils, the frozen mammoths, and major land canyons, especially the Grand Canyon. Surprisingly, It explains the origin of comets, of asteroids, and of meteorites.
According to Dr. Brown's theory, the ancient world that Noah lived in was very different from the Earth we occupy today.
Noah and other pre-flood people probably lived on one very large supercontinent with lush vegetation, inland seas, and major rivers. The mountains were smaller than today's, perhaps 6,000 feet high. Before the flood, about half the Earth's water was in interconnected chambers, about 10 miles below the Earth's surface. This formed a thin spherical shell, almost a mile thick. The pressure in the subterranean chamber had been increasing for centuries because the gravity of the sun and moon produced tides in the subterranean water that lifted and lowered the Earth's massive crust twice a day. This tidal pumping added gigantic amounts of energy to the subterranean water. This increasing pressure in the subterranean water steadily stretched the crust as a balloon stretches when the pressure inside increases. Failure in the crust began as a microscopic crack that grew in both directions at almost 3 miles per second. The crack, following the path of least resistance, encircled the globe in about 2 hours. As the crack raced around the Earth, the overlying rock crust opened up like a rip in a tightly stretched cloth. So the water exploded violently out of the rupture. The Bible even gives us a precise date, the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open. Then it says, and the rain fell. The fountains of water jetted supersonically into and above the atmosphere. The spray from these enormous fountains produced torrential rain such as the Earth has never experienced before or after. The supersonic fountains eroded the crumbling rock on both sides of the widening crack. This produced huge volumes of sediments that settled through the floodwaters, trapping and burying plants and animals, forming the fossil record. Eventually, the crack became so wide that the newly exposed floor of the subterranean chamber sprung upward, giving birth to the mid-oceanic ridge that wraps around the Earth like the seam of a baseball. The continental plates, with lubricating water still beneath them, slid downhill away from the rising mid-Atlantic ridge. After the massive, slowly accelerating continental plates reached speeds of approximately 40 to 50 miles per hour, they ran into resistances, and like a runaway crashing train, they compressed, crushed, buckled, and thickened, rising out of the floodwaters. This is why the major mountains are generally parallel to the oceanic ridges from which they slid. Today's major mountains were all pushed up in hours. The hydroplates, in sliding away from the mid-Atlantic ridge, opened up very deep ocean basins into which the floodwaters retreated.
This theory of a massive worldwide catastrophe in antiquity appears to support the biblical story of the deluge in every detail. But what other evidence exists to support this amazing theory?
In 1970, I predicted that large pools of salt water would be found beneath major mountains. That prediction has been confirmed in several ways, by gravity studies, by seismic studies, and by electromagnetic studies.
A paper published in the April 2001 issue of Science magazine announced the discovery of an electrically conductive layer under the Tibetan Plateau. The article suggested that such high conductivity at depths of approximately 10 miles could be achieved by a layer of aqueous fluids, some 1.6 kilometers thick and containing 10% brine. In other words, salt water.
Just how big these subterranean layers of water will turn out to be, no one really knows. But the article points out that the conductivity is evident across the entire Tibetan Plateau.
Recently, even more evidence to support Dr. Brown's theory became available. On March 22, 1998, a group of boys playing basketball in Monahans, Texas, narrowly missed being struck by a 3-pound meteorite that crashed to the ground 40 feet from where they were playing. The police were notified, and 48 hours later, NASA scientists cracked the meteorite open in a clean room laboratory. What they discovered inside stunned them all. The meteorites contained salt crystals and liquid water.
The NASA scientists who investigated this meteorite believe it came from an asteroid. That's unlikely, because asteroids in the vacuum of space cannot sustain liquid water, which is required to form salt crystals. It's also too cold and there's too little gravity. Earth is the only body in the solar system that can sustain liquid water on its surface. This demonstrates the enormous power of the subterranean supercritical water, the fountains of the great deep, that launch water and rock fragments into orbit around the sun. These rock fragments are still returning to the Earth as meteorites. Meteorites contain Earth-like material, including many types of living but dormant bacteria. This means that meteorites and their bacteria didn't originate in the vacuum of space. Meteorites are literally tiny chunks of the Earth itself returning home.
Scientists are also scratching their heads over another recent discovery. On the Kola Peninsula in northern Russia, they have created the world's deepest hole, extending to a depth of 7.5 miles. At this depth, what they expected to find was a layer of basalt, Earth's most common type of volcanic rock. What they actually discovered was something entirely different.
The hole didn't reach the basalt underlying the granite continents, but to everyone's surprise, they did reach hot, salty water flowing through crushed granite. Geologists are mystified, but the hydroplate theory provides a simple explanation.
Did the springs of the Great Deep burst forth and flood the entire Earth, just as the Bible says? Dr. Brown's hydroplate theory offers us a plausible scientific explanation for how this may have happened. But is there something more important to this theory? Could it be yet another example of the supernatural engineering observed throughout the Bible? If we now know where the water of the Great Flood came from, the same water that was instrumental in forming the fossil record, then when the Great Flood receded, where did all the water go? The answer to that question not only bolsters the scientific theory that a worldwide flood actually took place, it also provides an alternative explanation for the formation of one of the world's greatest natural wonders.
This is the question that stops most scientific investigators dead in their tracks. Yet the hydroplate theory makes the answer obvious. As the hydroplates crashed, they thickened and rose out of the water, forcing the floodwaters over the continents to recede. Simultaneously, upward surging subterranean water was choked off. As the floodwater drained off the continents, every continental basin was left brimful of water, producing many post-flood lakes. During the following centuries, some lakes breached their boundaries by either spilling over their rims or undercutting their banks. The rapid, catastrophic discharge of these lakes, much like the collapse of a large dam, carved canyons. Several centuries after the flood, two very large ancient lakes, Grand Lake and Hopi Lake, sitting on top of the high, rising Colorado Plateau, breached their boundaries and carved the Grand Canyon in just a few weeks. The massive canyon was not carved by the relatively small Colorado River over millions of years. That river is a consequence of the carving of the Grand Canyon.
Can the residual waters of Noah's flood account for the amazing natural beauty of the Grand Canyon? If Dr. Brown's theory is correct, then the Grand Canyon was carved only a few thousand years ago, and nearly every geology textbook needs to be rewritten.
One has only to look at the Earth's anomalies to see that the hydroplate theory provides a far better explanation of the Earth's present condition than the other more prevalent, well-propagated, but highly implausible theories.
So that was a great video by Dr. Walt Brown. Okay, you get the scientific explanation how this happened, how it could have happened, right? Now we're going to look at some more evidence supporting the flood. Climbers reaching the top of Mount Everest find fossils of sea animals on top of Mount Everest. How is that possible? It's a flood. Very simple. Right here we have giant oysters found in the Andes mountain range. Now these oysters, some of them are 11.5 feet wide, weighing 660 pounds. Okay? I want you to notice something. They're in the closed position. When oysters die, they open up. Okay? When you go to the beach, you find clams everywhere. You're hardly ever going to find a matching pair, right? Because when they die, they open up and they break apart. These things are fossilized in the closed position, meaning that they were buried rapidly alive and somehow ended up 5,000 feet above sea level, over 2 miles away from the ocean. Again, giving you an example of how massive these things are. Do you guys see any legs on that? It's not climbing a mountain anytime soon. Now, one thing that the scientific community will tell you is that it takes millions of years to fossilize organic life. That's just simply not true. This is a petrified cowboy leg found in 1980 with the cowboy's leg still in it. This is a fossil of a fish right in the middle of devouring another fish. Now, I'm not sure if you guys ever seen a fish eat before. That's it. Opens them out, gulps it down. Doesn't take much. It takes less than a second for a fish to devour another one, and yet this thing's been fossilized right in the middle of its meal, showing that it was buried rapidly and quickly, and it did not take millions of years for this to form. Here's a mother ichthyosaur fossilized mid-birth. Again, fish give birth rapidly. It's, for lack of better terms, showing yet again that it was buried rapidly and quickly. It does not take millions of years to give birth, by the way. I'm not sure if you guys knew that. Right here we got petrified rope. We got a petrified jellyfish. It's very difficult to fossilize soft tissue organisms. Here's a fossilized octopus arm. Right here, this is from a geology textbook taking this was in France, and you're going to find this actually all over the world. Those are trees growing, they're not growing. They are lodged into layers of sediment. How did they get there? Trees do not grow in rocks, okay? It's not going to waste its time trying to grow, getting sunlight in a rock. How this is explained during the flood, as you've seen in Dr. Walt Brown's video, essentially what the flood did is that it turned these rock sediments into liquid sandpaper, okay? With all the pressure being released from the waters coming from the fountains of the great deep. These trees were caught in that liquid sandpaper, right? And when the waters receded, it settled. And these trees settled amongst the sediment being lodged into all these stratified layers. You'll see that right here. This is in Nova Scotia, California. Right here we have, this is in Yellowstone, Wyoming. They're everywhere, all over this mountain, lodged in through multiple layers of strata. Here's a better look at that. Trees growing in sediment. Not growing in sediment, just placed in sediment. Okay, so was there really a flood? I think so. Outside of the Bible, you're also going to find over 330 global flood legends all throughout the world. Every single continent, there is a global flood legend. How did these giants come back after the flood? Because God said that these giants were on the earth in those days and also after that, meaning that somehow they survived the flood. Now, there are a couple theories on how these beings would have been able to survive the flood. Nothing's really solidified because the Bible doesn't even talk about how they survived. But I'm going to go over two different theories here on how they did. Now, one theory is the second incursion or multiple incursions. And personally, I don't think that happened. But I'm going to be talking about the book of Enoch now. What I want to explain to you about the book of Enoch, a lot of you, if you've studied it or looked into it, it's not in the canon of the Bible. It's not canon, okay? It's an extra biblical book, but they have found it in the caves of Qumran in 1947. And it seems that it was passed down with biblical literature to give an understanding of the times during that day. I will tell you this, do not take the book of Enoch as scripture. I do not. I used to be obsessed with it. I used to think like, oh, maybe it is scripture. I've read it though, and I personally do not think it's scripture. I think it is a historical commentary of the heritage of the Jewish people. Also trying to give you a better understanding of what was going on during those days. So with this idea of the second incursion being that another wave of fallen angels came down to earth to make more of these beings. Well, right here in the book of Enoch, just to give you an idea, Enoch, passing on to Azazel, which Azazel was one of the leaders of the fallen angels in those days, thou shalt not attain peace. A great sentence is gone forth against thee. He shall bind thee, neither shall find relief. Mercy and supplication be thine. On account of oppression, which thou hast taught, and on account of every act of blasphemy, tyranny, and sin, which thou hast discovered to the children of men. Then departing from him I spoke them all together, and they became terrified and trembled, beseeching me to write for them a memorial of supplication, that they may attain forgiveness, and that I might make the memorial of their prayer ascend up before the God of heaven. Because they could not themselves thenceforth address him, nor raise their eyes up to the heaven, and on account for the disgraceful offense for which they were judged. Then I wrote a memorial of their prayer and supplication, for their spirits, for everything they had done, and for the subject of their entreaty, that they may obtain remission and rest. So these angels knew that they had messed up bad, right? They had angered God. And they begged Enoch, go to God and please try to talk to him for us. We know that we messed up. This is what God had to say back to them. I wrote out your petition, and in my vision it appeared thus, that your petition will not be granted unto you for all the days of your eternity, and that the judgment has been finally passed upon you, yea, your petition will not be granted unto you. And from henceforth you shall not ascend into heaven until all eternity. And in bonds of the earth decree has gone forth to bind you for all days of the world, and that previously you shall have seen the destruction of your beloved sons, and ye shall have no pleasure in them, but they shall fall before you by the sword. So in this passage of the book of Enoch, it's actually reiterating what we saw in Jude chapter 1, verse 6, and also in 2 Peter, that God is going to bind them into darkness until the day of judgment. It's also reiterating all of the pantheon stories of the war of the gods, okay? They are going to fall by the sword. They're going to wage war against each other. So again, the book of Enoch is actually reiterating these narratives from all these different pantheons I just showed you. Now, my argument for the second incursion or multiple incursions is that if you were an angel and you've seen that these angels are terrified and begging God for mercy, and God is saying what is done, it's over. You would have to be pretty stupid to do this again. These angels were terrified. They were shaking in their boots, and they were begging for forgiveness. I don't think that there was ever a second incursion. This is my personal theory. We're going to talk about ancient technology and dimensional gateways. This picture is from a 5,000-year-old temple in Abydos, Egypt. I want you guys to look and tell me what you see here. Looks like a helicopter to me in this picture. Right here, I think that looks like a tank. My guess is that this thing right here is probably a submarine. This right here is your classical UFO saucer, okay? Now, the thing about UFOs, or the typical saucer scenario, is that throughout ancient history, they're referred to as the chariot of the gods, and the gods, of course, being the Nephilim. Now, some new things have come out about UFOs with the whole Bob Lazar documentary and his podcast with Joe Rogan. And Bob Lazar, who's famous for being the whistleblower and reverse engineering UFO spacecraft, right, in S4. Now, if you caught on to what he said in Joe Rogan's podcast, is that he said that some of those UFOs came from archaeological digs, okay? Now, you study these things long enough, you're going to see them in the Hindu belief called Vimanas, okay? Which is also just the chariot of the gods, and there's also multiple forms of these flying chariots, sometimes referred to as flying cities. There are spacecraft that are much, much larger than those that they call the city of the gods, which you will find stories of that all over the world. So right here, we have a 1,000-year-old, what I think is obviously a plane or a jet, right? From a South Colombian, South Colombian, in Colombia, South America. In the Smithsonian, they have this, and they labeled it as a stylized insect. Can any of you guys think of an insect that looks like that? That looks like a jet or a plane, plain as day, right? Another gold Colombian model of a jet, right here. We have an Egyptian hieroglyph showing that what looks like they were using some sort of electric or power system, whatever they're doing here. Personally, it looks like these could be eels, and what they could be doing is drawing the electrical current from the eels to either power something, or this is some sort of mummification process for these snakes or eels. But this does not look like stupid people. We've been taught in mainstream history that ancient people were dumb, modern man is smart. But if you're looking at what I'm showing you here, it's the complete opposite. Ancient man was far ahead of us. Personally, I think they were far more ahead of us than we are today, and that we're just still catching up to these ancient people. Now, this is one of many mound structures in the Nazca Desert in Peru. I selected this one to show you because this spider that you're seeing, you see this weird leg? This spider is actually a cave-dwelling spider that is 1,000 miles away from this location. This spider is an eighth of an inch. It takes a microscope or a magnifying glass to even observe these things. Now this cave-dwelling spider has no eyes, and they depicted that perfectly. And this long leg, now with these cave-dwelling spiders, that long leg is actually how they mate, okay? This leg grows out and they exchange genetic information to reproduce. Now we're going to get into some of the megalithic structures. One of the most famous one right here is Sacsayhuaman in Cusco, Peru. Now these blocks don't look big because it's from a faraway picture. Some of these larger blocks right here weigh 800,000 pounds, okay? That's about, what, about 400 tons? Now some of these smaller ones weigh about 100 tons, okay? This is made out of andesite. Now the people of this time in which mainstream history is trying to tell you that the people made these, right? But the people don't even say that they made them. They said that the gods made them. Now, for the people of that time, they only had copper tools. You cannot carve andesite with copper. Copper is a soft metal, and andesite is much harder. Another thing you're going to want to notice here, these things are cut perfectly to fit each other like Tetris, okay? There's no mortar holding these things together. And these rocks are so tightly packed, you cannot even fit a piece of paper in between them. That is how tight these things are packed together. So to give you an idea of what it would take to even move these things today would require a machine like this, the most powerful mobile crane in the world, okay? And this thing still cannot even lift one of those largest blocks at full boom. At full boom, it cannot even lift the largest. So how did the people do this? Because we don't find any evidence of machinery like this. You know, we don't dig up anything like this from ancient times. So how did they do it? Just to give you an example of even being able to carry sections, you would require a crane system like this just to even lift sections of Sacsayhuaman. That's only up and down. So now in regards to, the natives built that. Somehow, they built it. Well, this is from the royal commentaries of the Incas. There was an attempt to recreate these megaliths. It took more than 20,000 Indians to move one immense boulder. They moved it across the mountain, going up and down steep hills, and at a certain spot, it fell from their hands over a precipice, and the result was over 3,000 men being crushed to death. So even when they did try to recreate it, they were wildly unsuccessful, and many men died. And they didn't even get to set it up. This was just on the way transporting these large megaliths. So let's see what the legends have to say about this. Now, in Tiahuanaco, Bolivia, in the megaliths there, the legend goes that these blocks, these megaliths, were carried through the air to the sound of a trumpet. And that's from Fingerprints of the Gods, page 72 by Graham Hancock, who is an evolutionary atheist. I like using his information because we're coming to right around the same conclusion. He just has a different worldview. Now, construction, now we're going to go and look at the Pyramid of the Magician, which is in Mexico. Construction work was easy for them. All they had to do was whistle, and the heavy rocks would move into place. Now, in this legend, the Pyramid of the Magician, which is also known as the House of the Dwarf, was built by a dwarf. With the sound of a whistle, he was able to levitate these things and cut them, and fit them in. Within a day, this pyramid was built. This megalith, or this temple, was built within a day in their ancient legend. So what they were doing in that video is showing you that how sound wave manipulation can actually levitate and move objects. And that's just something we're just now discovering with today's modern sciences. Now, if you take that into account for what the people are saying, that these megaliths were moved by the sound of a whistle or the sound of a trumpet, what they're really telling you is that these things, these gods in which they called them, were using advanced technology, which we are still trying to figure out to this day, to be able to move those megaliths. Now, this next picture right here is a rendering of the Tower of Babel. Now, you're going to remember this story from the Bible in the book of Genesis, that it was Nimrod who decided to build this great. His idea was to build it to the heavens, right? He wanted to access heaven by building this massive structure. So we all know that God, he saw and he looked upon what they were doing, and he needed to confound their language and spread them across the earth. Now, here's the thing. If they keep on building this structure higher and higher, they're eventually going to run out of oxygen, right? So why does God have to stop them from building this if they were just all of a sudden going to eventually run out of air in the upper atmosphere? Now, what I believe about the Tower of Babel is that it was actually being built to access what many ancient legends and some of the newer terminology for it is stargates, which are essentially little rifts and tears in this reality that lead to the other dimensions, right? Because right now it is theorized that we actually live within 10 dimensions. I've seen some other theorize about 12 or 11 dimensions, but personally I believe that the Tower of Babel was actually being built to access a stargate. So to go more into depth about these dimensional gateways, this is a structure called the Gate of the Sun in Tiwanaku, Bolivia. Now, again, it's made out of the same, and it's made out of andesite, just like we saw in Saskatchewan. About this is that this is not the original structure. This top part is the original structure, where you see all this water erosion, which came from the flood, okay? All these erosion marks, and why there's very minimal damage down here is because this is actually new. Now, this is the Gate of Gods in Puno, Peru, okay? No one knows how this thing got here. There's not even there's not even a legend that clearly depicts on how or why this thing was carved. But today you can go here and you will see people, the native people, standing outside that gate with gongs, musical equipment, trying to open the doorway. So now we're going to go ahead and talk about Mount Graham, which is another area that is associated with what we call stargates, right? In which these godlike beings entered this world and interacted with man. So Mount Graham to the Apache is Holy Land. There were a people called the Tartums that lived in the valley as peaceful farmers, and they were invaded by these beings described as Goliaths who used tree limbs as toothpicks. They were led by a massive man named Evilkin, allegedly came from the northeast and were headed south to their home beyond the Gulf of Baja. They were destroyed by fire sent by the Great Spirit. This area, Mount Graham, is also associated with a dragon that had the power of speech that would bargain with men, and there were also other supernatural gateways and spirits that also came into this earth through the Stargate.
Research on space and even other inhabitable worlds.
So I'm a Jesuit priest, but here in Tucson we have a research base of the Vatican Observatory.
So the Vatican Observatory has ties that go back several hundreds of years. But why I find this story particularly interesting now is when I heard about it, I called my friend Dave. He's been a science journalist longer than I could possibly remember.
You mentioned this last week. I'd never heard of them before. I asked some people out here, and they basically said, what? Very few people, space journalists even. I just find that really weird.
I think the Vatican Observatory doesn't have a big press office like some of the rest of us do. So they came here when their site in Italy became too light polluted to really do forefront research. It didn't shock me when I found out that the Catholic Church was worried about dates and calendars. And what did surprise me was when I came here to Arizona and started meeting Vatican Observatory astronomers to find out that they also were interested in magnetic white dwarfs and asteroids and something more than just the calendar. That was cool, and that was a bit of a surprise. Yeah.
Wait till you find out about the Vatican astronomer saying he's operating with Project Lucifer. Okay, I promised you we would find out this great Catholic astronomer, the number one, is operating with something called Project Lucifer. What is that?
Well, up on top of Mount Graham in Arizona, there's an observatory complex that consists of 3 very high-powered telescopes. One is the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope. There's a radio telescope, and then there's one called the Large Binocular Telescope. This is the most powerful telescope in the world. In fact, they told us they can get better images of space than the Hubble Space Telescope can. Now, attached to this telescope is an infrared camera named L.U.C.I.F.E.R, which is really a kind of an odd name for a camera. And you know, from the information that we gathered, this thing was named by the Max Planck Institute and some German astronomers. But the Vatican is part of this conglomerate up there, and they're all working together. Now, what this instrument's used for is astrobiology, for looking for exoplanets, looking for other worlds. And the infrared spectrum is also very useful for seeing things that can't be seen with the naked eye. And many UFO researchers have noted that you can see a lot of ships and entities that you normally can't see.
Tell me about what the Vatican astronomers are telling you, or what others, experts, I mean, you had a research team.
Right.
Tell me a few of the things they're telling you.
Well, first of all, the day that we spent it on Mount Graham, the entire day there, we had the Jesuits speaking to us face to face. We also had systems engineers. It was astonishing, the access that they gave us. And one of the things we found amazing in the use of the L.U.C.I.F.E.R device and even the other telescopes is how commonly the astronomers spoke of UFOs. We were just taken back by the fact that it was almost a nuisance to them that there are so many.
This telescope, the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope, it was the first of the new technology telescopes that has been considered pretty much the norm now in developing telescopes. With the advance of computer technology, we have the capability of bringing that advanced technology directly into our telescope. So it's an expandable, it's almost like it's a living machine, so it can grow as technology grows.
Okay, now folks, we're going to talk about post-flood mentions of giants. And Chus begat Nimrod, which is Nimrod, and he began to be a giant upon the earth. He was a giant hunter before the Lord God. Therefore they say, as Nimrod, the giant hunter before the Lord, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babylon, and Orich, and Archad, and Chalin, and in the land of Shinar. That's from the Septuagint. So again, this is talking about Nimrod. Now, Nimrod's being associated with becoming a giant somehow. And there's a lot of theories on that. I won't get into it today. I'm just covering the post-flood mentions of giants in the Bible. Right here in Numbers 13, chapter 13, verse 28. Nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell within the land, and the cities are walled and very great. And moreover, we saw the children of Enoch there. So, in the book of Numbers, this is about Joshua and his spies checking out the promised land. And the people are bringing back reports of these giants that are still living there. So this goes more into depth in the book of Numbers. And they brought forth an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, the land through which we have gone to search it is a land that eateth of the inhabitants thereof. Cannibals, okay? Which aligns directly with some of the ancient legends that we were just reading about the gods being cannibalistic. And all the in it were men of great stature, and there we saw the giants, the son of Anak, which come of the giants, and were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so were we in their sight. So we're saying these guys are so massive, we are like grasshoppers in their comparison, right? So to give you an idea of how large these things was, we're going to go ahead and that's actually misprinted. This is actually in the book of Amos, chapter 2, verse 9. Yet I destroyed the Amorite before them, whose height was like that of the cedars, and he was strong as the oaks. Yet I destroyed his fruit from above and the roots from beneath. So in the Bible, a cedar tree is roughly about 40 feet tall, which is almost adding up to what we were seeing with the Spanish conquistadors of skulls being 4 foot in depth. That would actually match up to someone being close to 40 feet tall, maybe 25, 30 feet. The memes. Now we're going to go into the book of Deuteronomy chapter 2. The Emims dwelt there in times past, a people great and many tall as the Anakims, which were also counted as giants as the Anakims. But the Moabites called them Emims. That also was accounted a land of giants. Giants dwell therein in old time, and the Ammonites called them Zamzamines, great people and many and tall as the Anakims, but the Lord destroyed them before them, and they succeeded them and dwelt in their stead. Rise up and take your journey, and pass over the river of Arnon. Behold, I have given them thine hand of Sihon, the Amorite, king of Heshbon, and in his land begin to possess it, and I contend with him in battle. That this day will put the dread of thee and the fear of thee upon the nations that are under the whole heaven, who shall fear the report of thee and shall tremble and be in anguish because of thee. So what God's saying right here is that I'm going to put the fear of God into these beings, because there is no way that you could possibly fight them without me. Okay, so I'm going to put the fear of God into them so that you may conquer them. I'm not going to read this whole entire passage. This is about King Og of Bashan, in which God delivered him unto his people. Now, one thing I want you to take note here is that King Og, we get the measurement of King Og's bed, which was roughly about 13 to 18 feet in length and 6 to 8 feet in width. Okay, this bed was made out of pure iron. Okay, this is a heavy, heavy bed. What kind of a man is going to need a 13 to 18 foot long frame and an iron bed? Now, I've broken some bed frames, right, honey? But to get an iron bed, that means that this guy is going to have to be huge of stature, not just long, but also heavy. So now we're going to go and get to Deuteronomy chapter 7. This passage right here is talking about how God wants his people to treat these giants, these people that are associated, not even just the giants themselves, but the tribes of people that worshipped these giants. And the gist of this is that God is saying, when you go and conquer these people, wipe them all out, show no mercy. Because we've seen in other passages after Deuteronomy where God has his people fight against other tribes, he says, save the women and the children, and you can take their cattle, as reward. But when you're dealing with these giants, these Nephilim, show no mercy, everything must be destroyed. And going back to why God selected Noah to survive with his family, is because he wanted them to be genetically perfect, not corrupted by these Nephilim, right? So he's saying, just get rid of them all. I do not want their seed prospering through any of you. Or even, and it was also because they didn't want them to be worshiping those gods as well. So, why speak about giants? Okay, words of Jesus. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not be given her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heaven shall be shaking. But as the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving into marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall the coming of the Son of Man be. So, looking at this passage, you're saying, but as the days of Noah were, in the days of Noah there were giants. Now, I personally do not believe that the giants are actually coming back in the same way that they were in the present. I think what this is telling us is that there is going to be great genetic corruption of the human genetic code. There's going to be corruption of it. And today, what do you see? We see things like CRISPR technology. We see things like animal-human embryos being tampered with. We're seeing a great mixing of human DNA with those of beasts, trying to tamper with things that we don't know of. Actually, this year was the first year of genetically modified human beings born out in China with the use of CRISPR technology. There was actually a report that just came out by the scientists that genetically altered these babies, saying that they're not going to survive long. We don't know essentially they didn't know what they were doing. The genetic code is a lot more complex than they think, but nonetheless, we're getting closer and closer to this corruption of the human genetic code yet again, just like as the days of Noah were. So more biblical, more Bible scripture here to get me on the topic of why even talk about giants. And there shall be signs in the sun and the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth the distress of nations with perplexity. The sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. This is talking about end times revelations, right? Now, when it says men's hearts failing them for fear, for what they're seeing upon the earth, I do believe that there's going to be some sort of supernatural occurrences that are going to be happening in the near future here for the end times. So now we're going to go and talk about another verse in which is used quite frequently to talk about the giants. So Isaiah chapter 13 verses 1 through 3 in the Septuagint. Beckon with the hand, open the gates, ye rulers, I give command, I bring them. Giants are coming to fulfill my wrath, rejoicing and at the same time insulting. Now I wanted to talk about this because originally, in the Septuagint it says giants, but when you read it in the King James and you read it in the Hebrew depiction, I think it's actually talking about angels, but in the Greek it's just giants. So personally, I don't think that this is actually a good scriptural support saying that giants are coming back, even though I do believe that supernatural things are going to be occurring on the earth again. I do not interpret that verse anymore as many people do. So, while I talk about giants, demons, we're wrapping up here, guys, last 4 slides. So, demons. Demons are not fallen angels, guys. So this is in the book of Enoch again, which I said, don't take it for scripture. It will give us some information and some understanding of the times of then, but this is where demons come from. And now the giants, which are produced from the spirits of spirits and flesh, shall be called evil spirits upon the earth, and in the earth shall be their dwelling. Evil spirits have proceeded from their bodies, because they are born from men, from the holy watchers, is their beginning and primal origin. They shall be evil spirits on the earth, and evil spirits shall they be called. And the spirits of the giants afflict, oppress, destroy, attack, do battle, and work destruction on the earth, and cause trouble. They take no food, but nevertheless they hunger and thirst, and cause offenses. And these spirits shall rise up against the children of men and against the women, because they have proceeded from them. Book of Enoch is saying demons are the disembodied spirits of these Nephilim, these giants. Fallen angels, now, for the longest time people have said, oh, demons are just the fallen angels. That's not true. They're not demons. They don't need nor desire to possess a human body. They can do it all on their own. As we see here in Genesis chapter 19, verses 4 and 5, talking about the destruction of Sodom when the angels came to warn Lot and to get him out of the city. Even the men of Sodom compassed around the house round, both old and young, all the people from every quarter, and they called unto Lot and said unto him, where are the men which came into thee sight? Bring them out unto us, so that we may know them. So the angels, they came in the form of men, and they were so well disguised as men that the people of Sodom just thought they were normal, everyday men. They said, Lot, bring them out here so we can have sex with them. Okay? After that passage is when the angels blinded those men. But this is just showing you that angels can take on human form whenever they need to. They do not need to possess a human body. So we're going to look at Hebrews chapter 13. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some of them have entertained angels unaware. So again, in the book of Hebrews, in this chapter, it's telling us that angels can take the forms of human to the point of where you don't even know if that is an angel or human. They can disguise themselves perfectly. So this is what I used to solidify my belief that demons are not fallen angels. Why speak about giants yet again? Aliens and ufology. So as I was talking about before, with UFOs being the chariots of the gods and the Nephilim being those gods that they are attributed to. Well, over the last 100+ years, we've had over 100,000 sightings of UFOs. If the antediluvian giants had access to advanced technologies and stargates, like I believe, it would be an easy connection to the modern day appearances of these UFOs. UFO reports have an undeniable connection within areas that conduct occult rituals, summonings, sacred mounds, and mounts. Aleister Crowley in 1918 conducted a series of demonic summonings called the L.U.C.I.F.E.R workings. These were performed via sexual and ceremonial magic, his spelling, with the intent to invoke certain intelligences to physical manifestation. Aleister Crowley, you guys don't really know who he is, was a high-ranking occultist Freemason. And he was probably one of the most intelligent men to ever walk the earth. There's stories of Aleister Crowley playing up to 27 chess matches at once and winning every single one of them. This man was of great intelligence, and he was so highly rewarded with the Freemasons that they said that his metals could have weighed down an elephant because he was so highly decorated. So during these workings, Aleister Crowley made contact with the otherworldly intelligence, in which he called Lam, and that is the depiction of what he drew. Now, that looks like you would typically call a gray alien, or what you would think is an alien. So again, what I'm trying to say to you right here is that these Nephilim, through however they manifested to get to this form, that they are demons. That this is what he saw when he tried to summon demons. So again, this is linking back to ufology. I think what you are seeing today with this UFO phenomenon is that these things are actual physical beings. They are the Nephilim, which are the sons of the fallen angels, and they are here. They're coming back for the end of times, for the Great Deception. Now, to finish out, to show you why this is all relative, I have a video here of a man who was a UFO investigator.
Came across a particular video we had done 6 months before we came to the truth. We had videoed this person in his home. We had sat there right in front of him, listening to him, watched him, never heard a word he said. The video caught it, though. It's interesting. Went back and played this particular video, and this is what we found. What follows is the case of Bill D's experience that took place in Christmas, Florida in 1976. His abduction started out typically late at night in bed. Earlier in the evening, he saw some anomalous lights through the living room window over a forest north of his house. He assumed it was a police helicopter searching for drug runners or something. Whatever it was, it agitated his dogs for several hours thereafter. He eventually went to bed. He was lying in bed, kept wide awake by the barking dogs, when paralysis set in. He was unable to cry out. He could see nothing but a whitish gray, like a mist or a fog, although he sensed someone or something was in his room. His wife didn't awaken. The next thing he knew, he was being levitated above his bed. He then had the sensation he was being suspended by what felt like a pole inserted into his rectum. By this time, he was alive with terror, but couldn't scream. Here's where the story becomes very interesting. The following is an excerpt taken directly from the transcript of Mr. D's interview. I thought I was having a satanic experience, that the devil had gotten a hold of me and had shoved a pole up my rectum and was holding me up in the air. So helpless, I couldn't do anything. I said, Jesus, Jesus, help me, or Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. When I did, there was a feeling or a sound or something that either my words that I had thought or the words that I had tried to say or whatever had hurt whatever was holding me up in the air on this pole. And I felt like it was withdrawn, and I fell. I hit the bed because it was like I was thrown back in the bed. I really can't tell, but when I did, my wife woke up and asked why I was jumping on the bed. Typical type of experience. I hear this many times, same scenarios. In all the research we had done, we had never heard of a case of anybody stopping an experience. All the researchers, the top researchers, were saying that this could not be done. You couldn't stop an abduction experience. They had no record of it. So here I am with a case where a guy says he called out in the name of Jesus and stopped an experience. Was this one case unusual? But I knew I had something powerful. When God showed me to go back and look at this video, I knew this was something unique. And if I could confirm that it wasn't just unique in that one case, then this could be absolutely huge in the UFO community. I contacted these top researchers in the country. I said, guys, I've got a case here. I don't know what to make of it. I shared them the case. Each time I did, they asked, can we go off the record? And I said, sure. I can't tell you their names, but I can tell you what they said. Each one of them said, yes, sir, we've come across cases like this ourselves, where they've been able to stop it using prayer or Jesus' name. I said, excuse me, how come we have never seen this documented? You're telling us otherwise, that it can't be done, it can't be stopped. First answer they usually gave us, we didn't know what to make of it. I would have been fine with that. The second answer is what puzzled me and got me kind of angry. Because it was that one that I want you to hear for sure. They said we couldn't go there because it might affect our credibility in the realm. Do I hear cover-up? Did I mention government? No, I didn't. What I'm telling you is there's a cover-up about this information, and has been, by the top researchers that you people rely on to hear the truth from. I said to them, you know guys, I got nothing to lose. I work for a living, I don't write books, I don't do all this stuff that you do. I said, I just want to document this as a researcher. So I went after those cases because I now knew they were there. Over the next 10 years, I have now worked with over 400 cases of people that have been able to stop the abduction experience in the name and authority of Jesus Christ. This is documented evidence. Okay? Documented evidence. I questioned, I had to show biblically if this was relating to the Bible. Where did the authority come from? Back to Ephesians. At the end of Ephesians, in that chapter, talking about spiritual warfare, after putting on the whole armor of God, which is defense, protection, these people were showing that there was an offensive move. An offensive move. You can be in defense with protection, but to defeat the enemy, these entities, you have to do something offensive. Ephesians 6:19, and for me, that utterance may be given unto me, that I may open my mouth boldly. That's what these people have done in the presence of these entities, to make known the mystery of the gospel. What's that mystery? This is where the authority comes, that they're able to stop these entities, because it's Christ in you. That power was passed down from God to the Son, Father to the Son, over everything above the earth, on the earth, and below the earth. When you become a Christian, give yourself to Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, the indwelling of the Holy Spirit passes that authority on to you. Talk about high technology from planets from who knows where. I don't think this is what we're dealing with. And all this supposed high technology that they seem to have, guess what? It takes only one name to put them in their place. We are dealing with a huge, probably the most important deception on humanity. These are entities masquerading as high technological aliens, but they can be defeated by one name. I have case upon case upon case upon case that can prove that.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you ever have any questions about the Nephilim giants or anything I covered in this PowerPoint or anything related to the Bible in general, feel free to get in contact with us. You can do so through our app, which is available in both the Google Play and App Store at Affinity Christian Ministries. Check out our website, acm.church. Follow our Facebook page. Check us out on Instagram at acm.church. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out our Vimeo. Stay updated, and please check out our Mark of the Beast video that we have on our available on our channels as well. It's a great message done by my dad. Show some love, guys, and I appreciate all the time you've put in to watch this video, and I'd be happy to hear feedback from all of you. So have a great day. God bless, and be safe.